I found a riddle painted under my wallpaper that revealed the location of stolen artwork worth millions. I was 17 when Dad died and left me his crumbling Victorian house in Salem. Mom wanted to sell it immediately, but something about the place called to me. Maybe it was the way sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, or how the floorboards creaked like they were telling secrets. Against everyone's advice, I moved in. The house was a disaster. Peeling wallpaper, sagging ceilings, and a heating system that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. I started renovating room by room with money from Dad's life insurance. The living room was first. Layers of hideous floral wallpaper that had to go. I'd been steaming off wallpaper for 3 hours when I noticed something underneath. At first, I thought it was water damage, dark marks bleeding through the plaster. But as I peeled away more paper, patterns emerged. Lines, numbers, letters. Someone had painted directly onto the wall, then wallpapered over it. I worked frantically, ripping away decades of decorative layers. What I found underneath made my hands shake. It was a riddle, painted in faded black ink, where shadows dance at quarter past, and silent guardians hold secrets fast. 7 steps from where the eagles soar. Beneath the 13th lies much more. Below that were coordinates. 42.5195 degraan N, 70.8967 degraan W. My heart pounded. Those coordinates were less than 2 miles from my house. I Googled the location, Greenlawn Cemetery, the oldest section, where elaborate Victorian monuments cast long shadows across weathered headstones. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the riddle, tracing the letters with my finger. Dad had never mentioned anything about hidden messages or riddles. But then again, Dad had kept a lot of secrets. The next morning, I drove to Greenlawn Cemetery with a notebook and measuring tape. The coordinates led me to a section filled with towering monuments. Angels, eagles, elaborate Victorian sculptures. I found the eagle statue mentioned in the riddle, a massive bronze eagle perched atop the Morrison family mausoleum. 7 steps from the eagle brought me to a simple headstone marked, Unknown, 1847. It was the 13th grave in that row. I looked around. A few other visitors wandered among the graves, but no one was paying attention to me. I knelt beside the headstone and brushed away decades of leaves and dirt. Nothing. Frustrated, I sat back on my heels. Beneath the 13th lies much more. Maybe it wasn't referring to the grave itself, but something literally beneath it. I pressed my hands against the base of the headstone. The stone shifted slightly. My pulse quickened. Working my fingers around the edges, I managed to pry up a loose corner. Underneath was a small metal box wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside the box was a key and a folded paper. The paper was covered in my father's handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about our family. The Blackwood Gallery heist of 1987, $50 million in stolen paintings that were never recovered. The FBI gave up years ago, but I never did. I know where they are. My blood turned to ice. The Blackwood Gallery heist was legendary. 5 priceless paintings stolen from a private collection, including a lost Van Gogh. The theft had made national news. Dad's letter continued. Your grandfather wasn't the simple carpenter everyone believed. He was part of the crew that pulled off the heist. When the others wanted to fence the paintings immediately, he convinced them to hide them until the heat died down. He was the only one who survived long enough to tell me where they were hidden. The key opens a storage unit. Unit 247 at Riverside Storage on Elm Street. Inside, you'll find proof of everything and instructions for recovering the paintings. But be careful. There are others who would kill for this information. Trust no one, not even family. I sat in the cemetery for an hour, reading and rereading the letter. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Grandpa Thornton, the quiet man who'd taught me to build birdhouses and fix leaky faucets, had been an art thief. Dad, who'd worked as an insurance investigator his entire career, had been hunting stolen paintings his father had helped steal. The irony was suffocating. I thought about all the times Dad had brought his work home, spreading case files across the dining room table. He'd investigated art theft, insurance fraud, suspicious fires. I'd grown up listening to him talk about criminals and their methods, never knowing he was describing his own father's crimes. The drive to Riverside Storage felt surreal. I kept checking my rearview mirror, paranoid that someone was following me. Dad's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one, not even family. Riverside Storage was a dingy facility surrounded by chain link fence and razor wire. The kind of place people stored things they wanted to forget. The elderly manager barely looked up when I showed him the key and asked for Unit 247. He handed me a clipboard to sign and shuffled back to his portable TV, which was playing a game show at full volume. Unit 247's in the back, he mumbled around a mouthful of sandwich. Been paid up for years. Whoever's got that one must have money to burn. Unit 247 was in the back corner, away from the main road and hidden from view. I rolled up the metal door with trembling hands and stepped inside. Boxes lined the walls, labeled in Dad's careful handwriting, police reports, newspaper clippings, insurance documents, family photos. I opened the box labeled Evidence First. Inside were dozens of photographs, surveillance shots of men I didn't recognize, pictures of the stolen paintings, floor plans of various buildings. At the bottom was a thick folder marked The Crew. 5 men had pulled off the Blackwood heist. My grandfather, Thornton Hayes, Vincent Carlucci, a locksmith, Danny Morrison, the inside man who'd worked at the gallery, Russell Knox, the fence, and the leader, someone identified only as the professor. According to Dad's notes, 3 of them had died within 2 years of the heist. Carlucci in a car accident that investigators later suspected was sabotage. His brake lines had been cut. Morrison from a drug overdose. though he'd been clean for 3 years before his death. Knox shot during a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was stolen from his body or his shop. Only Grandpa and the professor had survived, and Grandpa died of cancer when I was 12. That left the professor. I found more disturbing information in another folder. Dad had been investigating these deaths for years, convinced they weren't accidents. Someone had been systematically eliminating the crew. His notes suggested the professor had killed his own partners to keep the entire fortune for himself. But there was a problem. The professor had never found the paintings. According to Grandpa's deathbed confession to Dad, he'd moved the artwork from its original hiding place years earlier, after realizing his partners were being murdered. He'd hidden the paintings somewhere new and taken that secret to his grave. Except he hadn't. He'd left clues. I found them in a box labeled personal. Letters from Grandpa to Dad, written over the course of several years. They looked like ordinary family correspondence. Updates about his health, memories of my childhood, advice about home repairs. But when I read them carefully, patterns emerged. Certain words were underlined. Numbers appeared in seemingly random places. References to specific locations in town showed up repeatedly. Dad had been working to decode these letters when he died. His notebook contained pages of attempted solutions, crossed-out theories, maps marked with red X's. He'd been close to solving the puzzle, but he'd run out of time. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading through Dad's investigation files. The scope of his research was staggering. He'd compiled detailed dossiers on everyone connected to the case. Gallery employees, police investigators, insurance adjusters, even the wealthy collector whose paintings had been stolen. Theodore Blackwood had been an eccentric millionaire who'd spent decades amassing his private collection. The 5 stolen paintings were the crown jewels of his collection, acquired through a mixture of legitimate purchases and questionable deals with European art dealers in the aftermath of World War II. Dad's notes suggested that some of Blackwood's acquisitions might have been Nazi-looted art, though nothing was ever proven. The old man had died just 6 months after the theft, some said from a broken heart. His foundation had offered substantial rewards for the painting's return, but they'd never been recovered, until now. One folder contained detailed profiles of each crew member. Vincent Carlucci had been a master locksmith who could defeat any security system. Danny Morrison worked nights at the gallery and had intimate knowledge of the building's layout and security procedures. Russell Knox was a fence with connections to buyers in Europe and Asia. My grandfather had been the crew's carpenter and general handyman. He'd built the specialized crates needed to transport the paintings safely and had helped plan the logistics of the heist. But according to Dad's research, Grandpa had also been the crew's conscience. I found a handwritten statement from Grandpa, apparently recorded by Dad during one of their conversations before his death. In it, Grandpa described his growing unease as the other crew members talked about their plans for the money. The professor wanted to sell everything immediately, Grandpa had said. Split the money 5 ways and disappear. But I knew those paintings belonged in a museum, not some private collector's vault in Switzerland. I convinced the others to wait, let the heat die down, said we needed to be smart about it. But Grandpa's real plan had been different. He'd hoped that eventually he could find a way to return the paintings anonymously. When the murders started, he'd moved the artwork to protect them, not from the police, but from the professor. I never meant for it to go this far, Grandpa had confessed to Dad. I just wanted to make enough money to provide for my family. Your grandmother was sick. The medical bills were piling up. I thought one job, one score, and we'd be set for life. Instead, he'd spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for the professor to find him. That night, I spread everything across the living room floor of Dad's house. My house now. Letters, maps, photographs, police reports. I felt like I was seeing Dad's obsession laid bare. Years of investigation, thousands of hours trying to solve a mystery that had consumed his life. I started with the underlined words in Grandpa's letters. When I wrote them out in chronological order, they formed a message. Where the river bends, the old bridge remembers what the foundation stones have forgotten. The Willoughby River ran through downtown Salem. There were 3 bridges, but only one qualified as old. The stone railway bridge built in 1889. I'd driven over it countless times without giving it a second thought. I spent the next day researching the bridge's history at the Salem Historical Society. Mrs. Pemberton, the elderly librarian, was delighted to help. She pulled out dusty volumes of city records and old newspaper articles. The Willoughby Bridge was quite an engineering marvel for its time, she explained, adjusting her thick glasses. They brought in Italian stonemasons to carve the granite blocks. Took them 3 years to complete. The bridge had been built using granite blocks quarried locally, with massive foundation stones sunk deep into the riverbed. During construction, workers had discovered Civil War-era artifacts buried in the riverbank. Bullets, uniform buttons, a cavalry saber that was now displayed in the town museum. What the foundation stones have forgotten. That phrase haunted me as I walked through downtown Salem that evening. The town had changed so much since Grandpa's time. Old buildings had been torn down, new developments had sprung up, but the bridge remained, a constant landmark in a changing world. I drove to the bridge that evening and parked nearby. The area beneath it was overgrown with weeds and littered with trash. A homeless camp had been set up under the north side, but it looked abandoned. Shopping carts filled with belongings sat rusting in the shadows. I climbed down the steep embankment, flashlight in hand. The foundation stones were enormous, granite blocks the size of refrigerators, stained with more than a century of river water and weather. Each stone was carved with Roman numerals, marking its position in the bridge's construction. I examined each stone carefully, looking for anything unusual. Most were weathered smooth, their surfaces worn by decades of flooding and ice. But as I worked my way around the eastern foundation, I found it. Carved into the granite, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, was a small symbol. A compass rose with the number 12 etched beneath it. The carving was shallow and weathered, but definitely man-made. It looked like something that could have been done with simple tools, the kind Grandpa would have had access to as a carpenter. 12 steps from the foundation stone brought me to a cluster of old oak trees. The area was overgrown and shadowy, perfect for hiding something. I searched the base of each tree until I found what I was looking for, a small metal cache buried beneath the roots of the largest oak. The cache was wrapped in multiple layers of plastic bags and had survived decades underground surprisingly well. Inside was another key and a map hand-drawn by my grandfather. It showed the layout of Hartwell Mansion, a Victorian estate that had been converted into apartments in the 1960s. Specific rooms were marked with numbers, and one basement storage unit was circled in red ink. My hands trembled as I realized what this meant. The stolen paintings weren't hidden in some remote location. They were sitting in the basement of an apartment building, less than 5 miles from where I grew up. I knew Hartwell Mansion. It was one of Salem's most recognizable landmarks, a sprawling Gothic revival structure that dominated the hill overlooking downtown. As a kid, I'd always thought it looked haunted, with its dark towers and elaborate stonework. Hartwell Mansion had been built by shipping magnate Edmund Hartwell in 1892. He'd made his fortune transporting goods between Boston and Europe, and he'd spared no expense on his dream house. The mansion had 47 rooms, including a ballroom, a library with hand-carved mahogany shelves, and a wine cellar that could hold thousands of bottles. After Hartwell's death in 1923, the family had lost their fortune during the Depression. The mansion had changed hands several times before being converted to rental units in the 1960s. The current owner was a property management company based in Boston that specialized in historic buildings. According to the map, Unit B7 contained $50 million worth of stolen art. I drove past the mansion that night, studying its layout. It looked unremarkable now, a sprawling Victorian building divided into 12 apartments, with basement storage units for the tenants. Security lights illuminated the parking area, and I could see televisions flickering behind drawn curtains. Getting access wouldn't be easy. The basement was locked, and I couldn't exactly knock on doors asking to search people's storage units. I needed a plan, and I needed help. That's when I remembered Zoe. Zoe Caldwell had been my best friend in high school before her family moved to Portland. She'd always been brilliant with locks and security systems, a skill she'd developed after being locked out of her house one too many times by her alcoholic mother. We'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, mostly through social media posts and occasional text messages. I knew she'd dropped out of college after 2 years to become a locksmith. Her Instagram showed her working on everything from antique safes to modern electronic systems. She seemed to love the challenge of solving mechanical puzzles. I called her that night, not sure how to explain what I needed. "Luna?" Zoe's voice was surprised but pleased. "I haven't heard from you in forever. How are you holding up? I saw on Facebook about your dad. I'm so sorry." "Thanks," I said. "That's actually related to why I'm calling. I need a favor, and it's going to sound crazy." I told her everything: the riddle, the cemetery, Dad's investigation, the stolen paintings. To her credit, Zoe listened without interrupting, asking only occasional questions for clarification. "So you want me to help you break into a storage unit to recover stolen artwork that may or may not be there, based on clues left by your dead grandfather who was apparently an art thief," she said when I finished. "That's accurate, yes." Zoe was quiet for a long moment. I could hear traffic in the background and realized she was probably walking home from work. "This is insane," she said finally. "I know. You could go to prison. I know. Even if the paintings are there, you can't exactly call the FBI and say you found them. Your grandfather was part of the crew that stole them. I know that too." Another long pause. "When do we do this?" she asked. I felt a rush of relief and gratitude. "You'll help me? Of course I'll help you. You're my oldest friend, and this is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in years. Besides, if there really are stolen paintings worth $50 million sitting in some basement storage unit, they shouldn't stay there." Zoe drove up from Portland the next weekend, arriving on Friday night with a duffel bag full of tools and a mischievous grin that I remembered from our teenage years. She looked exactly the same: purple hair, multiple piercings, and clothes that looked like they'd been assembled from a thrift store explosion. "You realize this is insane, right?" she said, as we sat in her car outside Hartwell Mansion at 2 a.m. "Even if the paintings are there, we can't exactly call the FBI and say we found them. Your grandfather was part of the crew that stole them." "I know," I said, "but I can't just leave them there. Someone else is looking for them, someone who killed 3 people to keep them secret." Zoe studied my face in the dashboard light. "You're not planning to keep them, are you?" "I don't know what I'm planning," I admitted. "I just need to know if they're really there." We'd spent the evening planning our approach. Zoe had done a reconnaissance walk around the building earlier, noting the locations of security cameras and identifying potential entry points. The basement had its own entrance around back, hidden behind overgrown bushes. "The lock is old," she'd reported, "probably installed when they converted the building. It shouldn't take me more than a minute to get through." Now, sitting in the darkness outside the mansion, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. We were about to break into a building to search for stolen artwork based on a treasure map drawn by my criminal grandfather. If we were caught, we'd go to prison. If we found the paintings, we'd be in possession of stolen goods worth more than most people made in a lifetime. "Last chance to back out," Zoe said. I thought about Dad, working for years to solve this puzzle. About Grandpa, carrying the weight of his crimes until the day he died. About the 3 murdered crew members who'd never gotten justice. "Let's do this." The basement entrance was around back, hidden behind overgrown bushes and a rusty dumpster. Zoe made quick work of the lock, a simple deadbolt that took her less than 30 seconds to pick. "Whoever maintains this building isn't very security conscious," she whispered as we slipped inside. The basement was a maze of narrow hallways lined with storage units, Each unit was secured with a padlock and labeled with apartment numbers. The air was musty and stale, filled with the smell of old cardboard and forgotten belongings. We found B7 in the far corner, exactly where Grandpa's map had indicated. The unit was larger than the others, with a heavy-duty padlock that looked like it had been installed decades ago. Zoe examined the lock with her flashlight. "This is old," she murmured. "Probably hasn't been opened in years. The mechanism might be corroded." She worked carefully, using a variety of picks and tension tools. The lock resisted her efforts, its internal components stiff with age and neglect. After several tense minutes, I heard a soft click. "Got it," Zoe whispered. I held my breath as she lifted the latch and pulled open the metal door. Inside were several large wooden crates, covered with dust and spider webs. They looked like they'd been there for decades, forgotten by the world. My heart hammered as I pried open the first crate with a crowbar we'd brought. The wood was old and dry, and the nails squeaked as they pulled free. Wrapped in protective cloth was a painting I recognized from Dad's photographs. "The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter," by Thomas Morrison, one of the 5 stolen works. It was smaller than I had expected, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, but even in the dim light of our flashlights, I could see the incredible detail in the brushwork. I unwrapped the next piece with shaking hands. A small but exquisite Van Gogh study of sunflowers, painted in the artist's distinctive style. The colors seemed to glow even in the darkness. "Holy shit," Zoe whispered. "They're actually here." We found all 5 paintings, exactly as described in the police reports. Sunset over Venice, by Claude Monet, Portrait of a Young Woman by Johannes Vermeer, The Garden at Giverny by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and the Van Gogh and Morrison pieces. Perfectly preserved, worth an estimated $50 million. I stood there in the dusty storage unit, surrounded by some of the most valuable artwork in the world, trying to process what this meant. That's when we heard footsteps in the hallway above. Zoe and I froze. The building was supposed to be asleep. It was nearly 3 a.m., and we'd been careful to park several blocks away and approach through the back alley. The footsteps moved purposefully across the floor, then started down the basement stairs. Heavy boots on wooden steps, moving with confidence. This wasn't a tenant getting something from storage. This was someone who knew exactly where they were going. "We need to go," Zoe whispered urgently, but there was only one way out, and whoever was coming down those stairs was blocking it. We quickly rewrapped the paintings and closed the crates. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal in the basement. The thick stone walls blocked everything. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. A flashlight beam swept across the walls, moving methodically from unit to unit. Whoever it was, they knew what they were looking for. Zoe grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the storage unit. We crouched behind the largest crate, barely breathing. I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The footsteps stopped outside Unit B7. "I know you're in there," a man's voice said calmly. "Come out slowly, and no one gets hurt." I recognized the voice and my blood turned to ice. It was Mr. Garrett, my dad's former partner at the insurance company, the man who'd given the eulogy at Dad's funeral, the man who'd helped me file the paperwork for Dad's life insurance claim, the man who'd been in our house countless times over the years. "Hello, Luna," Mr. Garrett said as he stepped into the storage unit. "I've been waiting a long time for you to lead me here." He was holding a gun, a small revolver that looked almost casual in his weathered hands. Behind him stood 2 other men I didn't recognize. Younger, harder looking, the kind of people who made their living doing things others wouldn't. "You killed my father," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Mr. Garrett smiled sadly, the same expression he'd worn at Dad's funeral when he'd told me how sorry he was for my loss. "Your father was my best friend for 20 years, he said. But he was about to ruin everything. He'd figured out I was the professor. He was going to turn me in. The professor, the leader of the crew who'd killed his own partners. I'd been having dinner with him, celebrating holidays with him, trusting him my entire life. Why?" I asked. "Your grandfather was supposed to tell me where he'd moved the paintings before he died," Mr. Garrett said. "But the old bastard kept his mouth shut. I spent 15 years looking for them. Then your father started investigating the crew deaths, and I realized he might have information I needed. So you befriended him. I was already his friend. We'd been partners for 5 years before your grandfather died. But yes, I stayed close, hoping he'd eventually solve the puzzle. When he did, I had to act quickly. You made his death look like a heart attack." Mr. Garrett shrugged. "Digitalis is virtually undetectable if you know what you're doing. Your father never suspected. He thought he was having chest pains from stress. Rage burned in my chest. This man had murdered my father, then comforted me at the funeral. He'd helped me process insurance claims while planning to steal artwork worth millions. How did you know we'd be here tonight?" I asked. "I've been watching you since you found your father's letter," Mr. Garrett said. "Following you to the cemetery, to the storage unit, to the bridge. You're not very good at counter-surveillance. I knew it was only a matter of time before you led me to the paintings." I thought about all the times over the past few weeks when I'd felt like someone was watching me. The car that had seemed to follow me home from the cemetery. The figure I'd glimpsed in my peripheral vision while searching under the bridge. My paranoia had been justified. "What now?" I asked. "Now you're going to help me load these paintings into my van," Mr. Garrett said. "Then you and your friend are going to disappear, permanently." One of his associates, a thin man with dead eyes, stepped forward with a roll of plastic sheeting. I realized they'd come prepared for this. They'd planned to kill us from the beginning. That's when Zoe made her move. She'd been quietly working her way around the back of the storage unit while Mr. Garrett talked. As he gestured with his gun, she grabbed a heavy paint can from a shelf and hurled it at his head. Mr. Garrett ducked, but the distraction was enough. I lunged forward and knocked the gun from his hand. It skittered across the concrete floor. We all scrambled for the weapon. Mr. Garrett was faster, but Zoe tackled him before he could reach it. They rolled across the floor, fighting desperately. The two associates moved toward me, but I was closer to the gun. I grabbed it and pointed it at them with shaking hands. "Stop!" I shouted. Everyone froze. Mr. Garrett was pinning Zoe to the ground, his hands around her throat. The two men had stopped advancing, but looked ready to spring. "Let her go," I said. Mr. Garrett smiled coldly. "You won't shoot me, Luna. You're not a killer. You're just a scared little girl playing with things she doesn't understand." "Maybe not," I said. "But I'm tired of being everyone's victim." I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space. Mr. Garrett screamed and grabbed his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. The bullet had caught him in the meat of his shoulder, not fatal, but enough to disable him. Zoe rolled away, gasping for air. The two associates looked at each other uncertainly, apparently not sure whether to continue the fight or run. "Call 911, I told Zoe, keeping the gun trained on all three men. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Her voice was hoarse from being choked, but she managed to give the dispatcher our location and request police and ambulances. The wait for help to arrive felt eternal. Mr. Garrett sat on the floor, pressing a torn piece of his shirt against his wound and glaring at me with undisguised hatred. His associates had their hands raised, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. "You have no idea what you've done," Mr. Garrett said through gritted teeth. "Those paintings were going to set me up for life. 37 years I've been waiting for this moment." "37 years you've been stealing and killing," I replied. "Time to pay for it." The police arrived within minutes, flooding the basement with officers and paramedics. I carefully set down the gun and put my hands up, explaining the situation to a detective named Rodriguez, who looked like he'd seen everything twice. "Let me get this straight," Detective Rodriguez said as we stood outside the mansion, watching crime scene technicians process the storage unit. "You found a riddle painted under your wallpaper that led you to stolen artwork worth $50 million, and when you came to verify it was here, you were confronted by the mastermind of the original theft who murdered your father?" "That's the simplified version, yes." Rodriguez shook his head. "In 20 years on the force, I've never heard anything like this. You realize you could be charged with breaking and entering, possession of stolen goods, maybe a dozen other things?" "I know," I said, "but those paintings belong in a museum, not hidden in some basement or sold to private collectors who don't care about their history." The detective studied my face for a long moment. "Why didn't you just call us when you found your father's letter?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself, because I didn't know who to trust. My father's letter said there were people who would kill for this information. For all I knew, the local police could have been compromised. "And you decided to trust a locksmith from Portland?" I looked at Zoe, who was giving her statement to another officer. She had bruises around her neck from where Mr. Garrett had choked her, but she was smiling despite everything. "She's my oldest friend," I said, "and she has a talent for opening things that are supposed to stay closed." The FBI art crime team took over the case the next day. Agent Morrison, no relation to the dead crew member or the artist, was a patient woman who listened to my story without judgment. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with short blonde hair and intelligent eyes. "Your father did excellent investigative work," she told me as we stood in the storage unit, watching technicians carefully remove the paintings. "His files will help us close several cold cases. We've been looking for these pieces for decades." "What happens to the artwork?" I asked. "It goes back to the Blackwood Foundation," Agent Morrison said. "They've been waiting 37 years to see these pieces again. The foundation is committed to public display. These will be in museums where people can actually see them." I watched as the Van Gogh was carefully wrapped and placed in a climate-controlled transport case. It seemed impossible that something so beautiful had been hidden in a basement for so long. "What about the charges against me and Zoe?" Agent Morrison smiled. "Technically, you committed several felonies, but you also recovered $50 million worth of stolen art and helped us catch a killer who'd been free for almost 4 decades. The U.S. attorney is inclined to be lenient, especially considering your father's contributions to the investigation." The story made national news within hours. "Teen solves $1 million art heist," read the headlines. CNN wanted interviews. The Today Show called. I gave a few interviews to local reporters, always emphasizing Dad's role in the investigation. He deserved the credit, not me. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside the house trying to get exclusive interviews. Art historians called to discuss the significance of the recovered paintings. True crime podcasters wanted to tell the story of the Blackwood heist and its finally resolution. I declined most of the requests. This wasn't about fame or attention. It was about justice and truth. The trial took place 6 months later. Mr. Garrett, whose real name was Professor William Garrett, a former art history professor who'd lost his job for selling grades, pled guilty to multiple charges. The evidence against him was overwhelming. In addition to my testimony and the physical evidence from the storage unit, investigators had found a treasure trove of incriminating materials in his house. Photos of the other crew members, detailed plans for their murders, and years of correspondence with potential buyers for the stolen artwork. He'd killed Vincent Carlucci by sabotaging his car, timing the brake failure for a winding mountain road where an accident would seem natural. Danny Morrison had been injected with a heroin overdose while he slept, despite being clean for years. Russell Knox had been shot during a staged robbery at his pawn shop. Each murder had been carefully planned and executed to look accidental or random. Mr. Garrett had waited years between killings, moving slowly and carefully to avoid suspicion. The defendant showed extraordinary patience and cunning, the prosecutor said during closing arguments. He spent 4 decades methodically eliminating his former partners and hunting for stolen artwork. He befriended the victim's son, gained his trust, and ultimately murdered him when he became inconvenient. Mr. Garrett received life in prison without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, he looked directly at me and spoke for the first time since his arrest. "Your grandfather ruined everything," he said, his voice filled with bitterness. "If he'd just told me where he moved the paintings, none of this would have been necessary. Your father would still be alive." Judge Williams gavelled him silent before I could respond, but I wouldn't have known what to say anyway. Some people will never take responsibility for their choices. The Blackwood Foundation offered me a substantial reward for recovering the paintings. The amount was never disclosed publicly, but it was enough to change my life completely. I used part of it to finish renovating Dad's house, turning it into the kind of home he'd always dreamed of. The rest went to establish a scholarship fund in Dad's name for students interested in criminal justice or art history. It seemed like the right way to honor his memory and his work. Zoe moved back to Salem and opened her own locksmith business. We became partners in more than just crime. She's my girlfriend now, and we're planning to get married next summer. She jokes that she fell in love with me during our criminal conspiracy, but I think it started long before that. The house feels different now. The walls that once held secrets now hold memories of Dad's dedication and Grandpa's ultimate redemption. I kept the riddle preserved under glass in the living room, a reminder of how truth finds a way to surface. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the rooms and think about the generations of secrets that passed through this house. Dad's investigation files are now part of FBI records. Grandpa's letters are evidence in a closed case. The paintings are displayed in museums where millions of people can see them, but there are still mysteries. Last month, I received a letter forwarded from the FBI field office. The envelope was postmarked from a federal prison in Ohio, and the return address showed only a number. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. The Blackwood paintings were just the beginning. "Your grandfather hid more than art. Look for the carpenter's mark where the old oak remembers what the foundation forgot." It was signed with a single initial, V. Vincent Carlucci was supposed to be dead, killed in a car accident in 1989. But what if Mr. Garrett had been wrong? What if one of the crew members had faked his death and spent the last 30 years hiding? I showed the letter to Agent Morrison, who promised to investigate. But prison records showed no Vincent Carlucci in the Ohio system, and the letter had been mailed from a medium security facility that housed over 3,000 inmates. "Could be a hoax," Agent Morrison said. "Your case got a lot of publicity. Someone might be trying to start a treasure hunt for their own amusement? Maybe. But I've learned not to dismiss family secrets too quickly. I haven't told Zoe about the letter yet. She's been through enough, and we're trying to build a normal life together. But sometimes I catch myself studying the old oak trees around town, looking for carpenter's marks I might have missed. The thing about family secrets is that they're like paint bleeding through wallpaper. You can cover them up, but they always find a way to show through. And sometimes when you start peeling away the layers, you discover there's more underneath than you ever imagined. The paintings are safe now, displayed in climate-controlled galleries where scholars and art lovers can study them. Van Gogh's sunflowers have never looked brighter, and the Vermeer portrait seems to watch visitors with knowing eyes. But late at night, when I'm alone in the house, I sometimes wonder what other secrets are hidden in Salem. What other crimes went unsolved? What other treasures are waiting to be found? I've started researching Vincent Carlucci, trying to determine if he really died in 1989 or if he's been hiding for 34 years. His accident report mentions that the body was badly burned, identified primarily through dental records. But what if those records were falsified? What if he'd planned his own death to escape the professor's killing spree? The letter mentioned the carpenter's mark, where the old oak remembers what the foundation forgot. That sounds like another riddle, another puzzle left by Grandpa. The reference to an old oak could mean the tree where I found the second cache, but there are dozens of old oaks around Salem. And what did Vincent mean by saying the Blackwood paintings were just the beginning? Had the crew stolen other artwork? Were there more caches hidden around town? Part of me wants to ignore the letter, to focus on building a life with Zoe and put this whole chapter behind me. We've been talking about starting a family, maybe opening our own business. The reward money means we have options most people our age never get. But another part of me can't let go. Dad spent years trying to solve this mystery, and he died before he could finish. If there are more crimes to solve, more secrets to uncover, maybe I owe it to him to keep looking. Last week, I started mapping all the old oak trees in Salem, cross-referencing them with city records and historical surveys. I found 17 trees that could qualify as old, planted before 1950 and large enough to serve as landmarks. 3 of them are near stone foundations, an old mill, a demolished church, and the remains of a colonial-era farmhouse. If I had to guess, I'd start with those locations, but I haven't started searching yet. I want to be sure this is the right choice, that I'm not just chasing ghosts and letting family obsessions control my life. Zoe thinks I should pursue it. "You'll never have peace until you know," she said when I finally showed her the letter. And honestly, I'm curious too. If there's more stolen art out there, it should be recovered. Agent Morrison was less enthusiastic when I contacted her again. "I understand your interest," she said, "but you need to be careful. If Vincent Carlucci is alive, he's been hiding for 34 years. People don't do that unless they have very good reasons. And if he's reaching out to you now, it might not be safe." She's probably right, but safety has never been my family's strong suit. This weekend, Zoe and I are going to visit the first location, the Old Mill Foundation near Willoughby Park. We'll bring proper tools this time, and I've already notified Agent Morrison about our plans. If we find anything, we'll call the FBI immediately. I'm not planning to be a hero. I just want to know the truth. The house is quiet tonight. I'm sitting in Dad's old study, surrounded by the case files and photographs that consumed the last years of his life. On the wall hangs a framed photo of him receiving a commendation for his work on insurance fraud cases. He looked proud in that picture, satisfied with a job well done. I hope he'd be proud of what I've accomplished, too. His investigation led to justice for 3 murder victims and the recovery of priceless artwork. The scholarship fund will help other young people pursue careers in law enforcement and art preservation. But mostly, I hope he'd be proud that I didn't give up when things got dangerous, that I saw the investigation through to the end, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Tomorrow, I'll start looking for Vincent Carlucci's next clue. Maybe it will lead to more stolen artwork. Maybe it will lead to nothing but another dead end. But I'll keep looking until I know for sure, because that's what family does. We finish what we start, even if it takes generations. And sometimes when we peel away enough layers, we discover that the truth was there all along, waiting patiently to be found. The paintings are home now, hanging in galleries where they belong. Van Gogh's sunflowers will outlive us all, their golden petals capturing light and hope for future generations to discover. But somewhere in Salem, another secret is waiting to be uncovered. Another mystery is calling out to be solved, and I'm ready to answer.